increased economic pressure in Russia will probably lead to increased military hostility for a couple of reasons. And that is, it will help accelerate the war effort in the hopes that Putin and his generals are correct in their assumption, which I think is wrong, but that they hope that they will be correct in their assumption that they can make significant territorial gains over the course of the summer and the rest of the coming year. This will also distract the rest of us from thinking that the economy is weak because it's a display of military strength. And I think this is what all autocrats do when they're backed into a corner. They lash out, they escalate, and they become that much more hostile. And I think that's probably what we might expect from Putin in the near term. The Russian economy is in the worst condition that it's been since the start of the full-scale invasion. But President Putin will still be able to fund the war, and there will still be food on the table of the average Russian family. We're not approaching that kind of situation. The challenge to the Russian government and the question right now is, what will that cost? How much is it going to cost the Russian economy to continue to fund the war and to keep the consumer economy ticking over? We know that this year already the Russian government has spent tens of billions of dollars, if not more, funding the war, and this is more than it expected. We also know that the Russian government forecast a budget deficit for all of 2026 that it has already blown through. And we know that Russia is having to support the domestic energy market to make sure that Russians can still put petrol in their cars. And that is becoming, all of that is becoming increasingly more expensive for the Russian economy. We know that attacks on Ukraine, and particularly on the capital Kyiv, have been intensifying in recent months. And the president has telegraphed this to Ukrainians and to the broader international community, that he's going to be stepping up his attacks on Ukraine and on the capital. So this is in part to show that Russia's defense capability is not diminished. This is a show of strength. This is, in addition to a military move, this is a signaling. It's a signaling to Ukraine, and it's a signaling to the West that the bombs are still there, that the intent is still there. And we also know that Putin's generals and the military community are telling him that by the end of the summer, he should be able to make significant progress on the military front. And so Putin is clearly listening to his generals who are telling him to intensify. They're saying that we have a chance of making big moves by the end of this summer and also by the end of 2026. And so Putin still feels that he can win this war, whatever victory may or may not look like to Moscow these days. And these intensified attacks are clearly military strategy, but there is signaling to Ukraine and there is signaling to the West. The biggest problem for the Kremlin right now is the damage to its energy export capacity. This is its major money spinner and a major source of funding for the war. So we've had a combination of factors here, and that is that the U.S. and Israeli war on Iran has caused a global spike in energy prices. That is largely favorable to Russia, but it's not as favorable as it could be because Russia's not able to extract, refine, and export as much oil and gas as it used to be because Ukrainian drones have penetrated deep into Russian airspace and they've damaged Russia's energy infrastructure. So there's less money coming in to the Russian budget than might otherwise be coming in. And this means that every single dollar or every single ruble spent on the military is coming out of Russia's rainy day accounts, it's coming out of a decreasing stream of revenue, and it's coming out of other potential sources of government spending, things like infrastructure, things like pensions, things like social payments, the sort of normal things that governments spend money on. If Putin begins to feel himself genuinely trapped or backed into a corner militarily or economically, you might see a sharper escalation in his military behavior. And so you'll see an escalation, an even greater escalation of attacks on Ukraine. You'll see increased hybrid hostility against the West, meaning more cyber attacks, meaning more underwater attacks, meaning more disinformation campaigns and political attacks on the West. You will also probably see an increased use of the nuclear threat, though not the use of a nuclear weapon. And that's a great way to distract everyone from the economic difficulties that the Putin administration is currently experiencing. The pressure is increasing, there's no question. There's infighting, minor infighting at the moment among political and economic elites. But the political structure in Russia is built in such a way that it is dependent on Putin's presence as the president. Most Russian political and economic elites have their status thanks to Putin giving them political and economic privilege. The war is still making lots of people in Russia very, very wealthy. There's a large constituency of elites who are benefiting from the war and who are very happy to see it continue. The other thing is that President Putin has to continue the military effort because he has to have something at the end of the day to show for it. If Russia were to stop its attacks on Ukraine right now, President Putin might have some difficulty defending all of these years of war for what is essentially a sort of shrinking at the moment, shrinking piece of Ukraine that has cost Russia hundreds of thousands of lives in terms of, and over more than 1 million in terms of fatalities and injured Russian soldiers. And the Russian political narrative right now is all built around the war. And so the war has to continue because ending it now would leave questions open about, how far have we gotten and what were we doing this for? Western governments, or at least we hope, that Western governments are running scenarios on the near-term, mid-term, and long-term future of the Putin administration, the Russian economy, and the Russian political structure as it currently exists. And one of the factors that you have to watch is what is the impact of economic challenges on Russia to the political system. For the time being, any sort of economic crisis in Russia will not trigger a political crisis. That's really not the way Russia works right now.